Welcome back to Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, part of the Migration Media Network. I'm Brendan Davis, your host, and this week's guest is David Jacobs. Now, David grew up in an idyllic part of Virginia, which is already a gorgeous state in case you haven't been there. He began traveling on kind of a cool fluke, which he talks about in the show, and he ended up in China, where he has stayed far longer than he ever expected. Along the way, he became a key part of the Beijing comedy scene, where he currently manages Comedy Club China. Now, they are responsible for hosting the open mics you've heard me talk about and other gigs many nights a week, and they are bringing in bigger and better talent for these special shows, really helping to expand the scene and push the boundaries of what's possible in comedy in Beijing. And I'm a big fan and supporter of these guys, so I hope you check out their shows if you're in Beijing. Now, this week's show is sponsored by the Complete Podcasting Course, which is my new learning program on udemy.com. You can find it via the link in the show notes at Crazy in a Good Way. And if you want a discount coupon, you can always get the course for only $10 US or the equivalent thereof. Contact me and I will hook you up. Now, please enjoy the show with David Jacobs. All right, well, I'm here with David Jacobs on the Big Fish. How are you today?
Good. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you here. I know you a little bit through the Beijing comedy scene, but I don't want to get ahead of the story. I have a typical first question. Let's start with that. That's a good place to start, which is please give us the short version of who you are, where you're from, and for you, why China, and then we will unpack it from there.
Okay, so like I said, David Jacobs is my name, or I guess like you said. I'm from really two places, which is outside of Philadelphia, New Jersey, and Northern Virginia, close to Washington, D.C. And I have to specify that I'm from Northern Virginia because a lot of people hear Virginia and they assume that I'm from West Virginia, and it's a very different place. Or even Virginia. Most of Virginia is very different from Northern Virginia. So I'm from Northern Virginia, Vienna, Virginia. I've been in Beijing for about 8 years. I guess the expat scene is not so big here, so I've known a lot of the guests that you've had on, and I've thought about doing a podcast a lot, so this is something I wanted to do for a while, so it's good to be here to talk through this, see how this goes, see how a more professional podcast would be than one I would start. As to why China, I was dating my ex-girlfriend, and we traveled to Africa. We went to a charity event, and they had a silent auction, and she put in like a super low bid for a safari trip to South Africa, and we ended up winning it. So then we went to South Africa, and then when we came back to start working again in DC, we were both just like, we gotta go see other places, you know. So we were deciding between Korea. We'd never been to Asia, so Korea, Japan, or China, and we figured, okay, we'd rather learn Mandarin. China's got more people. It's developing really quickly, so probably there's a brighter future in China. So we came to China kind of just to travel. Traveled a lot at the beginning. Liked Beijing. Moved to Beijing. Looked for jobs, and then I'm one of these foreigners that every year I'm like, okay, I'll stay one more year, and I've been saying that for 8 years. So I don't know. Probably I'll be saying it for another 90 years or something whenever they finally kick me out, but that's kind of my short intro.
So being from Northern Virginia, as you were telling me kind of in our pregame chat, that's obviously basically D.C. area. So that's very different, as you said, from West Virginia. Mm-hmm. What was it like growing up there? I mean, you know, spending the time there, and I know you went to school there in D.C., et cetera.
Virginia is amazing. I always say that California is the Virginia of the West. Like, I think Virginia is one of the best states in the U.S. I think it's one of the best places in the entire world. I truly do believe that. In terms of like American history, you know, the Civil War was fought pretty much in Virginia. You know, you've got the northern capital, which is D.C., which is more or less in Virginia and Maryland. You've got the southern capital, which is Richmond, which is in Virginia. So you just have so much history. You have more presidents from Virginia than any other place. You have, you know, they had to split up Virginia and West Virginia just because it was such an important economic and political center that they just felt it was too powerful in the early colonies. And in terms of the nature and the people, it's as good as it gets in America. I really do believe that. And Northern Virginia specifically, people don't know this, but the number one and number two counties in terms of median household income are in Northern Virginia. So I live in number 2, which is Fairfax County. Number 1 is the county right next door. So like the level of people that you meet, the level of streets that you drive on, the level of public schools is extremely high in Northern Virginia. Everyone would assume that New York or California is like the wealthiest places, but it's actually Northern Virginia. So I'm not saying I came from like super affluent beginnings, but I think it's a very high standard of living for most people that you meet, and also a very diverse group of people. You have black people, you have Asian people, Indian people, Central Americans, South Americans, and people like me who are just plain old white. So you have a good mix of all different types of people. So I think I didn't deal with a lot of things that people from other places in America dealt with, and also I was dealing with the best versions of basically every type of people that you met. So yeah, childhood was pretty good in Virginia. It's always good to go back. Kind of brings me back to those days.
Well, I love to hear that story, especially considering how many people couldn't relate to that. And I know that part of the country. I know how nice that is, and what you say about there's something about having a frame of reference of here's what good can really be.
Yeah,
like you understand where the bar is actually set for quality and things like that.
This is what, like, anyone who's one of my roommates, he's from California, and he's never been to the East Coast, so he has no idea what Virginia even is like, But most people you meet, when I say that I'm from Virginia, they'll say, like, oh, which part? And if I say Arlington or Vienna, then they'll be like, oh, I used to live in Northern Virginia. I love Northern Virginia. I can't wait to go back. It's like one of the best places in America. So once you've been there, you realize, like, it's a pretty special place. And that's why there's so many people living there and moving there.
Well, I know, again, not to get ahead of the story, because we're going to go chronological-ish, just for the sake of context. Obviously, you're very involved. I mean, you have a day job. We'll talk about that. But you're very involved in the comedy scene here, and both on the performing as well as on the managerial side. Was there any hint of that when you were growing up? Were you always the funny guy in your class, or were you into comedy really? When did you get the hook for that stuff?
The funny guy. I would think most of my teachers wouldn't think I was that funny, but I thought I was funny, and students usually thought I was funny. I was definitely a bit of a class clown and a bit of a bully, probably by today's standards. Well, by today's standards, I was a gigantic bully, but back in those days, we kind of had bullies, and it was okay. So I wasn't like a mean person, but I think humor was a way that I kind of got attention, and also, like, I would get people who maybe I wouldn't get along with that well, or even teachers who kind of didn't like me that much. With humor, we could kind of bridge a gap that we didn't have before. And I always liked performing. I always liked being in front of people. And I played the violin and the piano and sang in church choirs when I was like really little. So being in front of people and reading and talking, I always liked doing this. So I always had sort of a rebellious attitude, like, why would I listen to the teacher? Like, why don't people just listen to me instead? Which is very arrogant, but...
well, it's honest of you. You get points now for honesty.
Yeah, I mean, it's carried through, and that's why I started doing stand-up, and I do a decent amount of this in my work as well. I think public speaking and being in front of, people say Americans are more scared to speak publicly than of death, and for me, that's been the exact opposite. I always like to talk in front of groups of people. I think makes me really excited, and it makes you prepare, because you don't want to look like an idiot. So.
Yeah, like I have an open mic, but that's not for you to say. I can say it. What is your day job? Let's talk about that for a minute, because you brought it up.
So yeah, like I said, when I came to Beijing, I didn't have a job, so I was kind of looking for anything, and looked for a job online. It was all misspelled, just the advertisement was terrible, but I showed up 2 hours late, and I basically walked in, and they were like, so you're white, like, do you want this job? And got the job, started working there, and it's a company that recruits Chinese students to study in different countries, basically. When I first started, it was very small. We had maybe 10 employees, and now there's about 8 offices throughout China, and we have programs in, I don't know, maybe 15 different countries, and my goal, I guess, in life when I came to China was that I wanted to get paid to travel. And this was like a big life goal for me. And I got paid to travel. I get paid to travel still. I've been to Japan, Germany, Italy, France, the US a bunch of times. So it's been good in a lot of ways. And I also like thinking that I'm helping, Chinese students who might not have a chance in the Chinese school system, but I don't think I'm not sure how much they actually benefit going to the U.S. or to Canada to study. So I think it's very debatable. But I've gotten to do a lot of cool things with my job and help a lot of students, I think.
So I appreciate your honesty. You're still the same job?
Still the same job.
And you said something that, I mean, I didn't bat an eye other than the part of me that tracks these things that might need translation for people who aren't familiar with this world. You said something, just very straightforward, matter of fact, about, basically I was a white guy and I got the job. And some people might go, "Oh my God, why would you say that?" Well, explain what that is. I mean, that's a very true reality. It's changing a bit now, I think. But what's behind that?
I think Chinese parents, especially, have an expectation for what a teacher or an employee for like an international company is supposed to look like, which is, not. It's not. I don't know if it's good or bad. Probably bad, at least in terms of like how Western society would view it. But it is certainly an advantage. I went to a very high-ranked university in the U.S., and so I showed up 2 hours late to this interview, and they asked their first question was, "When can I start?" So they had really made up their mind as soon as they saw like where I went to school, and then once they saw my face, they were like, "Absolutely." So. It's just kind of the nature of the beast here that parents and companies, they expect a certain thing, and it does help market the company and market a school or market programs to parents and students if people look a certain way.
Now, what did you study in college? You went to Georgetown, right?
Yeah, I studied psychology and theology, so I was always interested in how people thought, and I was raised Christian, and I actually kind of paid attention in church. I probably paid more attention in church than I did in school. I don't know why I always found it kind of interesting. I think part of it is this like tying it back with stand-up comedy. I always liked the performance aspect of like the minister or the pastor or the priest giving a performance. And I always thought, man, I could always see myself doing that. And then when the minister would go up there and just not do a good job, I'd be like, man, what are they doing? Why don't they talk about this? Why don't they talk about that? So then I started really studying it more and trying to learn more about what Christianity meant. And then also, because I had no exposure at all to Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism in college, I really started learning about other religions just to try to understand what people in other countries thought and why they thought what they did and why they acted the way they did and why countries and societies are structured the way they are. And I do think that religion is the main reason for most of the foundational aspects of what a society and a culture is based on. So then coming to China, I think, I'm not even sure where I'm going with this. Coming to China, I think it just sort of flipped it and made me learn about things like Confucianism and Buddhism in a way that I had never seen before. And the trip before coming to China in Africa also just made me think, wow, the world is a much bigger place than Northern Virginia, which is still a great place, but I really wanted to get out there and see new things and learn new things.
Well, you obviously had something in you, some impulse or some imperative to learn about and relate to the other that started pretty early. Do you know what that was about? Was it the proximity? Was it the sort of diverse, although a more blessed slice of the pie, it was still a fairly diverse area you came from.
Yeah, I think.
What do you think planted that seed?
I think, like I said, I've always been kind of rebellious, and coming from Northern Virginia, you see people from all over the place, and I've actually met a lot of people from Northern Virginia in China. So I feel like people from Northern Virginia, although it's a really good place, they do kind of have this urge to see other places and maybe like help other places or like add something to new places. And I do think it's important for like any expat to go to a new place and try to don't think that you're better than the people just because you're different than them. I really don't like it when people from Western society think that Chinese people are like wrong because they don't wait in line or they spit or something. It's not the same rules. It's just, they don't even know, and they don't even think of it as bad. Just because you think it's bad doesn't mean that it's actually bad. So I think I like to spit. What's wrong with spitting? What's wrong with spitting? In the West, I don't really understand why it's so bad, but in the East, they don't think of it as bad. So I think to just impose your beliefs on a place that you're living and it's not even your where you're from, I think that's one thing I've always never really understood.
Was China ever specifically in your imagination, or was it just this fluke of travel and sort of luck in a way that got you here?
I wouldn't say that it was like really, since I was young, I was never like imagining going to the Great Wall or anything like that. But once I started thinking about traveling, I'd been to Europe, I'd been to South America, I'd been to Africa. So then logically Asia was the next place, and China was like, it was 2010-ish. So China was like really, it was after the Olympics, China was really starting to grow. So it was in the news a lot, and it kind of made sense. So that's where we went.
Well, you mentioned that you're one of these, you see yourself as one of these people who thinks, yeah, I'll give another year, and then, cut to 8 years later. What is it that has kept you engaged about being here?
So I do think that I've had this goal of traveling, being paid to travel. So I do think that I've accomplished that, and now I'm trying to think of like what the next big life goal is. And Beijing is China is a really fun. We're just Asia, I guess, but I think I'm more in line with China, like culturally, than a lot of other places in Asia. But I think they're just really fun. They're just really exciting. There's like 20 million people in this place. Not saying that I know 99.9% of them, but there are that many people. So there is just like a certain feeling and excitement being in a place that's just so big and has so many people. And it's very hard to find this. Even like New York kind of feels small to me now.
Totally.
So I think like Beijing, Shanghai, maybe Bangkok, maybe Tokyo. There's only Seoul. There's only a few cities I've been in the entire world where you feel just like, whoa, this is the future. This is like really like a mega metropolis. So I've kind of gotten used to that, and I kind of like it. Going back even to DC, people think DC is a big city. There's 1 million people in DC. It's tiny.
Yeah, my neighborhood has 1 million people.
Yeah, my apartment building probably has like 200,000 people, and so just the amount of stuff you can do and see, and the way things change here, changes so fast. And if technology changes, then it just takes over an entire city with 20 million people, which is twice the size of Sweden. There's just so many things interesting about living in a place that has so many people. Of course, there's obviously downsides as well, like the pollution and the traffic and things like this, but there's also a lot of good sides, and I like a lot of the positives. Compared to the negatives, I think the positives are more appealing to me.
I relate to that. I'm on the same page with you. You're mentioning that with your job, it affords you the ability. You get to travel for part of your job, so you've kind of really won in that sense. You're getting to do this thing that was your whole goal, and you're getting paid to do it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
But now I'd say I'm just kind of bored of doing the same thing over and over. So it's now about thinking about what the next goal is going to be. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on these days.
So speaking about the future and seeing what's next, I would assume that part of that's going to involve comedy for you because you're so involved in it here. Tell us a little bit about Comedy Club China and what that is and what your role in it is, actually. In addition to being a performer, you're also one of the guys behind the scenes here.
Right. So I went to a picnic at Chaoyang Park, and I had my pet rabbit with me, who is now dead, but he was great. It's okay. And I met a guy named Toby Jarman, and he was one of the pioneers of Comedy Club China. He told me I should try it out, so I went to an open mic, and I thought, again, similar like in church, I thought, man, I'm funnier than all these people. So I went back the next week, and then I just kept going back, became close friends with the people who were kind of running Comedy Club China or who were eventually getting tired of running Comedy Club China. And when one of them, David Fertitta, moved back to the U.S., he kind of passed the torch to me, and now I've been kind of managing it and helping put on the shows and the open mics. So I do think that at least I'll always be a huge fan of comedy, and I'll always be going to shows. But it's hard to once you start performing and you start liking performing, it's hard to think about not ever doing that ever again. So I think even the managerial aspect. I love putting on shows. I love not even performing. I just want to watch other people perform and know that I put on a good show and like it's sold out. That's a great feeling for me too.
Well, what have you guys been up to lately for the sake of people listening? I know that part of it is that you're bringing in bigger people with you're bringing in headliners from places, and there's a level of ambition here that is interesting. So how is that path going so far? It seems like the early days of bringing in bigger and bigger folks.
So we've been bringing people in for a while, but I now think that there's kind of like a Cold War, like an arms race going on in Shanghai, because there's 2 or maybe 3 clubs who are all competing for this, the same market. You have Kung Fu Comedy, you have Shanghai Comedy Club, you have Comedy UN, and then there's some new players, and they're all trying to bring in like bigger and bigger names to try to kind of outbid each other. And luckily in Beijing, I kind of equate it to Game of Thrones, how like they're the Lannisters, and we're up north and we just kind of do whatever we want. So if we have shows with KFK, that's fine. If we have shows with Shanghai Comedy Club, that's fine. So it's been really good because we can kind of pick and choose what shows we want to put on. And yeah, I want to put on bigger and better shows with names that people have like really heard of, not just me telling them that like this person's good. I want them to be like, whoa, this guy is coming or this girl is coming, like Sarah Silverman, or there's been some really, really big names floated around for the next year. So I'm trying to make sure we're in a place where we can even handle like such a big name, like such a big show.
Well, how does that work? I'm obviously not asking for any of your trade secrets and confidential stuff, but just kind of more to the macro level, how do the economics of that even work here in Beijing? Because we were talking again ahead of time. I won't be name droppy, but there are a few of these people you're talking about who I might have known back in the day, and I have an idea of what their guarantees are. How does that even work? Given that I'm going to pay, the equivalent of $20 or $25 US for the ticket as an audience member, and how big is the play? How does it even work?
Yeah. So again, we're lucky that we've got King's Landing down in Shanghai. So
are we already helping bring them over?
Yeah, so they're the ones hoofing the majority of the bill, and they want to maybe make a little side money. They want another leg on the tour, so there's like a couple stops. Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, they've got a great club. So a lot of times they're stopping there, then coming to Beijing, then going to Shanghai, and then going, maybe other places in China. So we're like one leg of the tour, and I think we've now shown that we're able to sell out shows and sometimes even have much better shows than they have in Shanghai because we're the only like fish, we're the big fish in the Middle Kingdom, so to speak, in Beijing. So they're kind of fighting over the same small market, or bigger than here, but we kind of have the English scene, at least, is really Comedy Club China. So it's easier for us to sell out and have bigger shows, I think.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about this because, of course, one of my early guests is our friend Jesse Appel, who has U.S. China Comedy Center. What I see about you guys is, Comedy Club China, it's a virtual club and that you don't have a physical space that you have to pay a light bill, whereas Jesse has a center and they do a lot of different things. So they have a space, but then, of course, Comedy Club China is doing shows in bars and clubs and other places. How has that worked to your advantage, would you say, being that you don't have like an overhead of a physical structure and you can kind of float around?
Yeah, it's definitely both a blessing and a curse, I think, because in Beijing, it would be hard to have like a dedicated comedy venue because I think the government would just be all over it, like wondering what are you saying every single night and wanting scripts and stuff. So I think it would be pretty difficult here. In Shanghai, it's a little more relaxed. But because of that, bars close, or, we used to do open mics at Hot Cat, which was in Fangjia Hutong, and a lot of that got bricked up, so people just stopped going. So we've really had to like hop around, and we're kind of like a virus, we kind of, wherever we can go, we kind of move there. But right now we've had a pretty steady open mic at Patty O'Shea's, which has been pretty good. Hit or miss because the crowd at Patty's is often drunk and British and they're kind of annoying. But it's been good. And then we've got at the local, which is kind of a Solitude, mainstay. They've been real good to us. Nice renovated upstairs, which looks like a club.
Really nice spot, and yeah, they totally made it into a perfect. They got the fake brick wall and everything. Actually, they had a real brick wall.
Yeah, and then Friday we also do a Friday mic at Joe's, which is on Gongti, and that's actually been pretty good. So like we're starting to have pretty good open mics, but Jesse Appel, he has to really worry about how can he pay his bills, and with an open mic you can maybe make a little money. Probably the bars make some money, but for him, is he really getting a consistent number of people who are coming and drinking, because a lot of his stuff is Chinese, workshops and stuff.
Right.
And I remember he did a show. He told me that they did a Chinese improv show, and they sold 4 beers total. And yeah, they sold like
and
4.
That place holds like
Yeah, they had like 50 people. He said they sold 4 beers total. And my friend Eric Selly, who was supposed to be here tonight, as Jesse was telling me the story, Eric said, "Hey,
that was me."
No, he said, "Can I get 4 beers?" And he ordered it like right there for the English show that was happening that night. So
nice.
It just happened like right at the same time. So I think foreigners tend to drink a lot more at comedy shows than Chinese people do. So we've been trying to help Jesse Appel put a couple more shows on there, and try to help him out with his spot, because it's been really good to us. He's been really helpful.
Well, I'm due to catch up with him. I actually have just announced on the show that went live yesterday, whatever day this is we're recording, yesterday, that I'm going to be starting a second show, a second version of Big Fish that I'm going to call Side Dish, which will be the Side Dish in the Middle Kingdom, which will be catching up with someone who's been on the show before about what's going on. So that'll be my topical sidecar to this main show. And I'm just telling you this like you're my going to organize this as the manager, but I'm going to get in touch with Jesse and see if I can get him to spill the beans on what he's got in store there.
That's great.
It's not me to put you on the spot for it.
No, he's great, and I do like he's got ambitious plans. He's also, he and I think kind of see eye to eye. We're both trying to grow the scene. We're both have a level of integrity and that you don't always see with like musical acts or with comedy acts. So I think he's always very straightforward to me, and I'm always straightforward to him. So it's been good working with him.
So let's talk about the 2 prongs of this for you. So let's talk. There's both the performing stuff, and then there's the managerial and the business stuff. In terms of actual comedy, who are your guys? Who are your inspirations and your touchstones, man? What's your style?
So I really like Norm Macdonald. He used to be on Saturday Night Live for a long time.
Love Norm.
He's often considered like a comedian's comedian. Like every comedian kind of views him as the best. I think he's just so deadpan, and he has this like, "Aw shucks, I'm a little country boy," but he's actually the smartest guy in the whole room. I always liked that about him. But I really like more like improv kind of comics. So one of my favorite guys is a guy named Rory Scovel. I don't know, I think he'll be really famous in the future. I think he's starting to get pretty famous. He's been on a lot of late night TV shows, but I don't like saying the same jokes. I'm not really a big joke writer. I don't know. One of my friends in Shanghai, he always said, "Man, David, you'd be a great comedian if you had good jokes." And it's kind of true, because I have a good energy, I have a good stage presence, so I'm a really good host, or at least I'm an okay host. And I like that Rory Scovel, his show, if you see him, twice in the same night, his first show is going to be very different from his second show. If you see him 3 days in a row, it's going to be 3 completely different shows. So I always wanted to be somewhat like him in that regard.
And so your own style, and I've seen you before, so I have a sense of this, but how would you describe, your take on it? Like what's you just mentioned you're not a big joke guy, you're more of an improv guy. What's in your head when you get up there?
I'd say it's more about, for me, it's more about the energy. I want people to be in a good mood when I'm on stage. I want to say things that they know are bad and they know they don't like, but they like me anyway. So I kind of get away with things that if another person said it, kind of going back to like high school or middle school, like this class clown thing, I want to be kind of like this class clown and everyone else is the teacher, So I kind of say things that they're like, "Ugh, I shouldn't be laughing." but they still don't think I'm a jerk, you know. So that's kind of the style that I'm going for on stage.
So you deal with more uncomfortable topics a bit, in a way?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, I'm not asking you to perform. Obviously, this is not that kind of show. But in terms of subject matter, just give an example of the kind of thing that you might riff on.
So I've been trying to not drink as much recently, but I have a lot of
good luck with that.
Yeah, especially in Beijing,
especially the comedy scene,
especially spending all my time at bars where they're like, "Would you like the usual 12 gin and tonics, David?" But yeah, so I joke a lot about my struggles, you know, living in, you know, adult Disneyland in Beijing where you can just get anything you want and all the bars stay open 24 hours a day if as long as you're sitting there pretty much. So talking about dating, talking about, you know, kind of normal topics. But I think like a overarching theme of like feeling shame, I guess, for who I am. Even though I think I'm like a decent person, I still feel like I should be much better than I am. So kind of tapping on that. And I think making the audience see that shame kind of come out and then still also having like a connection. That's kind of what I go for.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that. Trying to build the empathy. You're enjoying the dirty candy and trying to have people.
Yeah,
support
I think
you.
so. Louis C.K. He's kind of like the best that's doing it. Well, I guess used to do it,
yeah.
You know. But I think even in light of his news, it all came from this place of like shame. He felt shame about who he was, and he was able to twist it in a way that you knew he was coming from a dark place, but he made it funny. So he's saying things that you would normally find, you know, offensive or disgusting, but he makes you laugh. So he's getting his shame out and like making you sort of empathize with him or sympathize with him. So it kind of makes him, it's like a healing process for him. And I'm kind of trying to do the same thing. Not saying I'm as good as Louis C.K. or even 1/1000th of him.
You didn't come off like that. Don't worry.
Yeah.
You didn't come off in any kind of a way, but honest, which is good. Speaking of honesty, we were talking beforehand, and you asked me, without me trying to recreate the whole conversation because that would be boring. You basically asked me, what do I get out of going to these shows? And I hadn't been asked the question, that's why it took me a moment, like a deer in headlights, to come up with a fairly simple answer, which I can say now. It's a way to see and hear a level of honesty that is not something that you have so much in day-to-day life. And that's true whether we're talking Beijing or living in Northern Virginia or wherever you are, but especially here, given how packaged things are and how sanitized. And the guardrails are fairly high here. So have you had any issues? Have you seen any issues with material in terms of, you know, where is that line? I mean, we understand the obvious. We don't deal with political stuff, things like that. But have you seen any other issues with that, or have you had any issues with that?
Not much, but I'm pretty lenient about it compared to most places. And when we've had comedians on shows with comedians from Shanghai, Shanghai comedians have definitely said like, "Whoa, I can't believe you are allowed to say these jokes," because they have a much tighter leash than.
Interesting.
But it's just
seems
because,
like it would be opposite, given that we're the epicenter of the universe here.
It's just because they're like trying to run it in a more like professional way, I think, and ours is much more loose, and we're not too worried about it, I guess. But we've also had the police, you know, show up at shows before at Hot Cat, and you know, so there's definitely danger. I haven't really seen too much material that I would consider offensive, but. Maybe one time. I'm not even sure I should really say what this guy said.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask you to repeat something that was problematic, but it seems like people do a good job of making their point, but finding an artistic way to be truthful.
Sometimes, but
usually
it's an open mic, and most of the people here, you know, Beijing's a very transient city, so people are coming and going. So you might have a comedian come for 6 months or 3 months or a year or 2 years, and then they go on to the next place. So you don't have a lot of people who have like really been doing it for 5, 6, 7 years, maybe a few. So it's you got to constantly find new people and just deal with what you got. So that's just the name of the game in Beijing.
Well, let's go to that other rail we were talking about, which is the business part of this. How would you characterize the scene here? And I've had, Nigel was on kind of recently, and so I asked him this question, and Eric will be on in probably a few weeks after you as well, another comedian. So, but your perspective is going to be kind of unique on this, I think. How would you characterize the state of the comedy scene here currently, and where do you see it going, artistically as well as professionally? Like, what's it going to take to get this to like another level?
I think that we're right on the cusp of like making it more professional, or like more like a business. And by we, I mean I. So I just want to make, as long as our shows keep selling out and people having a good time. We just had a show with Tom Rhodes, who's like a pretty big name comedian, and everyone was really appreciative, and everyone told me it was really, really a really good show. And I had friends coming that don't go to a lot of comedy shows, so I think that's a very good sign. But I think the main thing that we need to focus on is making our open mics and making our comedians just better and have more fun at the open mics, because then that's how you really build a crowd. That's how you get people to get on stage. If you go to an open mic and it's really fun, then you're more likely to do comedy yourself. And if you keep making it fun, that's one very good thing about the Beijing comedy scene, is it's very supportive group. People are always hoping that everyone gets better, where in other places it might be really competitive and people don't want to help you out. They don't want to give you advice because they're kind of viewing stage time as precious. But here, everyone's really helpful. Everyone's always trying to support each other. So that's one thing that we need to focus on, making the open mics as fun as we can.
What would you say to somebody who's interested in comedy and wants to do it, to give it a try? What are some things that you tell somebody that's got the itch, but doesn't know really sort of how to start?
First thing is you should try to write some jokes, because people go up there sometimes just thinking they're gonna tell something funny, but a story that's funny to your friends is probably not that funny to a bunch of uninterested strangers at patio shays who are all drunk and watching some soccer game. So you got to write some jokes, and the main thing is just don't be afraid. Like, the worst thing that happens is you tell a couple jokes and they don't work. And it's a bad feeling, of course, because it's kind of embarrassing. But, what happens? You get off, everyone says, hey, it was your first time, try again. That's the worst thing that happens. So, and if you do well, it's just a feeling that it's very hard to describe, maybe like a musician or an athlete, if you do well and the whole crowd is feeling you and they're telling you that you did a good job afterwards, doesn't get much better than that for a comedian.
What do you see for yourself in the next handful of years, just in general?
For work, I want to start transitioning out of an office. I'm very bad in an office. I'm very bad with a boss. So, similar to the goal of being paid to travel, that's a goal. I want to kind of get out of the office life, the commuting everyday life. But the way I need to do that is by gaining a lot of skills that would allow me to do that. With comedy, I really like the managerial aspect, so I want to just keep growing the scene. And similar to the people before me, when I leave, I can pass the torch off to the next person and feel good that, I put them in a good position. And just like basic goals, I want these open mics to just be better, and I want to do shows in theaters with like 200 plus people, because we've never done a show that big, and I would really like, maybe once, but I would really like to start doing really big name shows where, everyone would know that this is like the thing to do in Beijing on that day. So that's kind of my goal for comedy. In terms of performance, I guess I would like to do 30 to 40 minutes. I can probably do 30 minutes, but I don't think it would be that good. So I just need to go back and really focus on what jokes are good and make those jokes better, and be willing to tell them over and over again until I can actually do a long chunk of time on stage. But it's tough.
David, thanks so much, man.
Yeah, nice to meet you, basically, over this microphone.
Okay, that's the show this week. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to find out more about David or Comedy Club China. You can visit the links in the show notes. If you want to learn more about me or the complete podcasting course, you will find that too. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.